You wanted them so badly it was almost unbearable. Every unanswered text was its own small devastation. Every interaction was something you replayed. Every moment they seemed slightly out of reach made them feel more necessary than oxygen. And then, somehow, eventually, you got them. They chose you. They stayed. They were available and warm and present in exactly the way you'd spent months wanting them to be. And something happened. Something quiet. Something you didn't say out loud because it felt ungrateful and irrational, and frankly, a little damning. The feeling started to fade. Not because they changed. Not because something went wrong. Just because they were there. Reachable. Certain. And certain, it turned out, felt different than you expected. Welcome to Thought Paradox. Today we're talking about one of the oldest, most universal, and most psychologically revealing patterns in human desire. Why you want what you can't have, and why, the moment you have it, you stop wanting it quite as much.
Let's start with what wanting actually is. Because wanting, real wanting, the kind that keeps you up at night, is not primarily about the thing you want. It is about the gap between where you are and where the thing is. The neuroscience is precise about this. Dopamine, the neurochemical most associated with desire and reward, does not fire primarily when you receive something. It fires in anticipation of receiving it, in the reaching, in the almost, in the space between wanting and having. This is why the chase of a thing is almost always more neurochemically intense than its arrival. The text that hasn't come yet produces more dopamine than the one that arrives. The person who hasn't chosen you yet occupies more of your mind than the one who has. The opportunity not yet secured feels more compelling than the one sitting in your hands. This isn't weakness. It isn't shallowness. It isn't some fundamental inability to appreciate what you have. It is your brain doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Because a brain that became satisfied the moment it obtained something would stop pursuing, stop acquiring, stop reaching for the next thing. And a brain that stops reaching is, in evolutionary terms, a brain that stops surviving. The wanting was never meant to end with the getting. The wanting was meant to keep you moving. The problem is that we are no longer trying to survive on a savanna. We are trying to build relationships, careers, and lives in which the constant reaching, the perpetual dissatisfaction, the vanishing of desire at the moment of arrival causes an enormous amount of damage. Because this pattern doesn't only live in romantic attraction. It lives everywhere desire lives. In relationships. The unavailable person is magnetic, the person who texts back immediately, who is clear about their feelings, who makes their availability obvious, somehow produces less pull than the one who leaves you uncertain. You tell yourself you want someone who communicates, who shows up, who makes you feel secure. And then someone does all of those things, and you find yourself, inexplicably, slightly less interested than you expected to be. This is not hypocrisy. It is the dopamine architecture of desire responding to the removal of uncertainty. The chase ends. The neurochemical reward of anticipation ends with it. And what's left is the person, real, present, unfiltered, without the chemical overlay that made everything feel so urgent. In careers and ambitions. The job you wanted for 3 years, the project that consumed you, the goal you organized significant portions of your life around. You get it. There is a moment of genuine satisfaction. And then, sometimes within weeks, sometimes days, the wanting shifts. to the next thing, the higher thing, the thing that is still slightly out of reach. The achievement, now achieved, no longer produces the neurochemical response that pursuing it did. And so the mind quietly relocates desire, somewhere further ahead, where it can want again. In creativity, the idea you couldn't stop thinking about, the project that existed in your imagination with a perfection that felt almost sacred. And then you start making it. And the gap between the version in your head and the version on the page, or the canvas, or the screen, produces a disappointment that has stopped more creative projects than any external obstacle ever has. The imagined thing was perfect because it was unreachable. The made thing is imperfect because it is real. And some people, unconsciously choosing the perfect imagined version over the imperfect real one, never finish anything. In the things you already have, the relationship that felt electric when it was uncertain, and now feels ordinary now that it's stable. The city you moved to that felt full of possibility and now feels like background. The life that looked like everything from the outside and feels like not quite enough from the inside. This is not ingratitude. It is the hedonic treadmill, the psychological tendency to return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive changes. The brain adapts. The new becomes normal, and normal, for a system wired to want, is where desire goes to find its next object.
Now, here's where we go further than most conversations about this ever reach. Because the wanting what you can't have pattern is not just neurochemistry. It is also, for many people, something more personal, more specific, more rooted in history. The blueprint of early attachment. For people who grew up with inconsistent caregiving, warmth that was real but unpredictable, love that required effort to access, the emotional template was set early. Love is something you reach for, something that requires pursuit, something that, when finally given, produces a relief so intense it feels like a rival, and something that, once consistently available, starts to feel different than expected. Because the nervous system that learned love through pursuit doesn't fully know what to do with love that simply stays. It waits for the withdrawal, waits for the condition, waits for the signal that it's time to start working again. And in the absence of that signal, in the presence of just consistent, uncomplicated love, it experiences something uncomfortably close to boredom. Not because the love isn't real, but because it doesn't match the frequency the nervous system was tuned to. The fantasy versus the person. When someone is unavailable, when you can't fully have them, you fill the gap with imagination. And imagination, unconstrained by reality, is extraordinarily generous. It gives them the qualities you want them to have. It resolves their contradictions. It edits out the difficult parts and amplifies the compelling ones. You fall in love, in part, with a person you constructed. And when they become available, when the real person arrives with their actual complexity and their actual limitations and their actual ordinariness, the constructed version doesn't survive contact with them. The loss you feel isn't loss of the person, it's loss of the fantasy. And that distinction, understanding that you were grieving something that was never quite real, is one of the most clarifying and painful realizations in the territory of desire. The self-worth equation. For some people, wanting what they can't have is also about worth.
The logic, running below consciousness, goes something like this. If someone chooses me, fully, without reservation, without me having to earn it, it might mean I didn't have to earn it. And if I didn't have to earn it, what does that say about its value? About my value? The pursuit is, in part, the proof. The harder the chase, the more the arrival means. The more it confirms something about their desirability, their worthiness, their capacity to be wanted by someone worth wanting. Easy love, in this equation, feels like it doesn't count, because it didn't require them to prove anything.
Let's talk about the arrival, because it is almost always, to some degree, a disappointment. Not a catastrophic one, not necessarily a deal-breaker, but a quiet settling, a slight deflation. The particular feeling of a thing becoming real and therefore becoming less than the version that existed as pure potential. This is called arrival fallacy, a term coined by positive psychologist Tal Ben-Shahar. The belief that achieving a desired outcome will produce lasting happiness, and the discovery, upon arriving, that it doesn't. Not in the way, or to the degree, or for the duration that was expected. The arrival fallacy doesn't mean the goal wasn't worth pursuing. It means the brain fundamentally overestimates how much having the thing will change how it feels to be alive. And in the specific territory of desire for people, the arrival disappointment has an additional layer. The person you were reaching for existed, in part, as a mirror. They reflected back to you your own capacity to want, your own intensity, your own aliveness. And when they become fully yours, when the mirror becomes a window and you can see them clearly, as a separate, ordinary, complex human being, rather than a surface for your desire, the reflection changes. And sometimes what you realize is that some of what you were feeling wasn't about them at all. It was about the version of yourself that existed inside the wanting. Here's the question underneath all of this. If the wanting is more compelling than the having, if the chase produces more aliveness than the arrival, what does that mean for how you're supposed to build a life, a relationship, a career, a creative practice? Are you just doomed to want things until you get them, and then want something else? Not exactly. But understanding the pattern changes what you're looking for. In relationships, you're looking for depth, not uncertainty. The neurochemical hit of the unavailable person is real, but it's produced by uncertainty, not by the person's actual worth. The work is learning to find depth compelling in the place where you used to find unavailability compelling. To be drawn to someone's interior, their actual complexity, their growth, the way they think, rather than to the dopamine of not knowing if they'll text back. Depth, unlike uncertainty, doesn't disappear when they stay. It increases. In ambitions, you're looking for process, not arrival. If arrival always disappoints, then building a life organized around arrivals is a design flaw. The people who sustain motivation and satisfaction over time are almost always people who found a process they want to be in, regardless of where it leads. Not the goal, the daily practice of moving toward it. The writing, not the book. The building, not the finished thing. The relationship, not the milestone. Process doesn't arrive. It just continues. And a thing that continues doesn't trigger the arrival fallacy. In the self, you're looking for presence, not pursuit. The aliveness you feel in the chase is real, but it doesn't have to be manufactured by external uncertainty. It can be found, with more difficulty, with more practice, with less neurochemical assistance, in genuine presence. In the moment fully inhabited, the meal actually tasted, the conversation actually heard, the person actually seen, not as the object of your desire,
but as someone as complex and alive as you are. That presence is available. It just doesn't come with the same automatic intensity as the chase. It has to be chosen, deliberately, repeatedly, against the grain of a brain that would rather be reaching.
You didn't want them. Not exactly. Not only. You wanted the version of yourself that existed inside the wanting. The self that was fully mobilized, that had somewhere to reach, that felt the particular, irreplaceable aliveness of being in pursuit of something not yet certain. That self is real, and that aliveness is real. The question is just where you point it. Because the wanting doesn't have to be toward the unavailable person, the withheld approval, the thing just out of reach. It can be towards something that sustains rather than something that vanishes the moment you arrive. Toward depth instead of distance. Toward growth instead of acquisition. Toward presence instead of pursuit. The brain that wired you for the chase is not your enemy. It is one of the most powerful motivational systems in existence. It just needs a direction that doesn't lead, every time, to the same quiet disappointment of a thing obtained and immediately outgrown. The most alive you have ever felt was not in the having. It was in the moving toward. So move towards something worth arriving at. Something that doesn't disappear when you reach it. Something that gets deeper the longer you stay. I'm Thought Paradox. If this one named a pattern you've been living inside without fully seeing, share it with someone who needed to see it too. See you in the next one.